Good evening, everybody. Good evening. We're about to start, so if you'd like to take your seats, sit down. If I can introduce myself, I am Gerard Batten. I am the UKIP MEP for London and have been since 2004. I'd like to welcome everybody here in the packed house in the Emmanuel Centre and to welcome all our viewers on the internet. Let me tell you what the agenda is going to be. I'm going to make a speech for about no more than 10 minutes. We're then going to have a short film which lasts a few minutes, and then we're going to have our star turn, Nigel Farage, who will make his speech, followed by questions and answers. Now, let me start. We are now entering a pivotal period in our country's history. We've had to wait 40 years and almost 2 generations to have the opportunity to vote in a second referendum on membership of the European Union. In 1975, Harold Wilson's Labour government renegotiated our terms of membership, and he came back from Brussels with a few minor cosmetic changes, which now nobody can remember what they were. But Mr Wilson assured us that we would retain democratic control of our country, as the British government would always have a right of veto over all EU legislation. Well, where are we 40 years on? We lost our veto in 1987, courtesy of Mrs Thatcher, and now most areas of domestic policy are under the control of Brussels and decided by a qualified majority vote. Now, in any given year, it's estimated that between 50% to 85% of new laws come from the European Union, and our own government has no choice but to implement them. The EU has its own government in the form of the Commission. It has its own flag, its own anthem, its own parliament, its own court of justice, and its own central bank and its own currency. In 1993, all UK citizens were made citizens of the European Union, and that included our head of state, Her Majesty the Queen. Now, our sovereign may be Her Majesty here, but as far as Brussels is concerned, she's just plain Citizen Elizabeth Windsor. If that isn't a state, then I don't know what is. The EU was always intended to be a political state, a United States of Europe, with centralised control in Brussels. That goal has almost been completed, if in reality, if not yet actually in name. Now, back in 1975, Harold Wilson published a pamphlet which was sent to every voter in the United Kingdom, called Britain's New Deal in Europe. Now, that sounds very familiar to the title of David Cameron's letter to the EU entitled A New Settlement for a United Kingdom in a Reformed European Union. Bit longer. So what exactly is it that Mr Cameron wants to renegotiate and reform exactly? The answer is nothing of any great importance or substance. His requests are either laughable or unachievable. The bureaucrats in Brussels must be reading his letter with a mixture of contempt, amusement and perplexity. Now, a few years ago, José Manuel Barroso, the former president of the European Commission, described the EU as an empire. He said quite accurately that it was a unique historical achievement to build such an empire by entirely peaceful means. And he was absolutely right. The British too once had an empire and almost uniquely in history disbanded it relatively peacefully and will soon have an opportunity to leave the EU's empire. Now, I could point out the absurdities of Mr Cameron's letter to the European Council, but let's just have a bit of fun and look at it another way. Let's take a little flight of fancy and imagine for a moment that Mahatma Gandhi, the champion of Indian independence, had taken a Cameronian approach to his negotiations with the British. What would such a letter from him have read? So from Mr Gandhi to the Prime Minister, Mr Attlee. Dear Prime Minister, as you know, the Indian people have been agitating for India to leave the British Empire, and events have forced me to offer a referendum on continued membership. Now, rest assured that whatever happens, I will recommend we stay in. But I'm writing to you to seek reforms to India's place in the British Empire so that I can secure a vote to remain. This letter does not set out detailed proposals for reform or the precise means of bringing them about, because they won't consist of anything meaningful anyway. But I do suggest an urgent meeting with the Viceroy so that we can chat about how we can hoodwink the public over tea on the terrace. My concerns are not being about a member of the British Empire as such, but rather they boil down to one word: flexibility. And in that spirit, I set out 4 main areas of concern. Number 1, please do not force India to accept the pound as its currency. The currency of India is the rupee, and please will Her Majesty's government accept that it has a multi-currency empire, at least until after the referendum. We humbly beseech Her Majesty's government to stem the tide of law that is creating an unbearable burden on Indian business. Your last directive on the imposition of milk quotas for sacred cows almost caused a revolution. As you know, the question of Indian sovereignty has always been a point of contention with those who don't share your dream of empire. While, of course, you will retain all of your existing powers and no doubt accrue more powers as you see fit, we need to agree a form of words that says India can be excluded from ever closer empire. Lastly, number 4, immigration is a hot topic as India has a rapidly expanding population. Of course, any citizen from anywhere in the empire must be free to come to India whenever they feel like it. But we want some restrictions on new entrants. If any new country joins the empire, then their citizens should not be free to come to India for at least 6 weeks. After that, it doesn't matter. Now, if you can see your way to making these small rhetorical concessions, I am sure I can con the Indian people to vote to remain in your empire. After that, we can forget all about this silly nonsense, continue business as usual, and the sun never need set on this part of the empire. I remain your humble servant and vassal, Mohandas Gandhi. Now, he never did write such a letter, thank God, because the Indians had Gandhi, but we have Mr. Cameron. Now, I have to wind up here. If the British people vote to remain in the EU, then our country will cease to exist in any meaningful way as an independent, democratic nation. If we leave, let me correct myself. When we leave, we will increase prosperity and employment prospects. Leaving will give us the power to decide how we solve our own problems in our own way. There are about 200 countries in the world. Only 28 of them feel the need to belong to the European Union. When we leave the EU, we don't need the Norwegian or Swiss quasi-peripheral status as members of the empire. When we leave, we should follow the Indian model, a democratic, independent nation-state that is proud of itself and its place in the world and with a bright future. Thank you very much, and we're now going to move on to the short film.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.